In the spring of 1200 BC, a 9-year-old girl named Nefertari stood in the courtyard of Ammonius' temple at Karnak while priests shaved her head clean. 3 days earlier, her father, a minor bureaucrat, had delivered her to settle a debt he couldn't pay in silver or grain. He called it an honor. He told her she would serve the gods and must be grateful and obedient. When the bronze razor scraped away her long braided hair, she began to cry. An older priestess slapped her. "Servants of the god do not weep," the woman said. "You have no tears. You have no name. You belong to Ammonius. Ammonius does not accept weakness." That was the beginning of a 43-year life inside the temple. A life defined by confinement, control, and a system that hid exploitation behind walls painted with divine scenes. She would never walk beyond the precincts. She would never marry. She would never own anything or decide what happened to her body or her future. When she died, she would be buried without a name, without a marker, without family. And here's what most people do not realize. Nefertari was not an exception. She was one of thousands. Egyptian temples kept entire populations of girls and women for their lifetimes under titles that sounded holy but covered a much darker reality. God's wife. Servant of the god. Hand of the goddess. Pure one. Divine adoratress. Poetry for a machine that destroyed lives as efficiently as an army, exploited the weak as predictably as a slave market, and erased identities as completely as conquerors erase a captured capital. This is about what Egyptian priests did to temple virgins. Nothing here is myth or sensational fiction. It rests on inscriptions carved in stone, on papyrus accounts, and on ancient writers who saw and recorded these practices. If you want to see how religious authority can be used to prey on the vulnerable, how sacred words can disguise systematic abuse, subscribe now. This channel tackles the darkest corners of antiquity with careful attention to sources. Hit subscribe, tell me where you're watching from, and whether you have visited these Egyptian temples without knowing what happened inside. Let's separate the myth from the reality of Egyptian temple women. And understand why most people have the story wrong. A warning. It gets much darker than you expect. People hear temple virgin and picture dignity and reverence. White linen. Perfume. Music. Women who chose a noble calling and were protected and honored. A Roman Vestal vibe with Egyptian style. That image is wrong. It is the product of ancient propaganda that worked exactly as intended, covering the machinery behind beautiful language and sacred art. What were these women in fact? In temple ideology, the common term was hemet, literally, servant of the god, often translated as wife of the god. Related titles appear too: Jadet, worshipper; Shemaet, singer or musician; Kenet, general temple attendant. Duties and ranks varied, but the structure was the same. They were bound to the temple, ruled by its hierarchy, and stripped of autonomy, sometimes even of their names. Virginity, in this context, means ritual purity. Purity meant being set apart from the profane. In practice, it was enforced through direct control over bodies and relationships. They were kept pure for the god, which meant, in reality, accessible to priests who claimed to act as the god's representatives. Most did not choose this life. They arrived as children through pathways that removed choice before they had words for it. Some families offered a daughter as fulfillment of a vow, to win favor, or to lessen the cost of feeding another mouth. The family called it a gift to the gods. For the girl, it was permanent abandonment. Others, like Nefertari, were given as payment for debt. Temples were huge economic powers. They owned land, loaned grain and silver, collected taxes. When families could not pay, they sometimes paid with their children, usually daughters. That was legal. And it was trafficking masked as devotion. And some girls came as tribute from conquered lands. Egyptian campaigns in Nubia, Libya, and the Levant seized people. Among them were girls assigned to temples, absorbed into a system from which they would never return. The ages will shock you. Inscriptions and papyri mention girls as young as 8 or 9 entering service. Some evidence hints at even younger, though exact ages are hard to fix because birth records were not always precise. Many had not reached puberty. They were children, incapable of consent. Consider another child. Mutmua, 8 years old, taken from a Nubian village after Thutmose III's conquest. Soldiers collected gold, ivory, grain, and children. Mutmua and 12 other girls were roped together and marched north for weeks. She did not speak Egyptian. She was beaten when she cried. In Thebes, she was assigned to the temple of Mut, the goddess of motherhood and queenship. She would serve a goddess of mothers while being denied any ordinary chance to become one. The transformation of a child into temple property followed a set script designed to break the will and rebuild identity around obedience. It took days or weeks. First came water, purification. The girl was led to a sacred pool. Her old clothes were taken. She was washed again and again with water and natron. Priests and senior women examined her under the language of purity. The ritual often crossed into invasive inspection. The child learned immediately that her body was subject to religious authority, that discomfort did not matter, that protest meant punishment. Then the head shaving. Standard for several temple ranks. It marked purity and separated the sacred from common life. It also erased a piece of self. Hair carried identity. Losing it made every girl look like every other servant. Often the shaving was paired with a new name. The birth name was forbidden. The new name linked to a deity or a function. Beloved of Ammonius. She who sings. The old name died by decree. The child was told not to speak it. Not even to think it. Punishment followed if she slipped. Symbolic death complete. She no longer belonged to a family line. She belonged to the temple. Then came the ritual of divine marriage. In some temples, girls were ceremonially wed to the god they would serve. Dressed as brides, led before the statue, they spoke vows of total service and purity. Priests, speaking for the god, accepted the vows. Mutmua's turn came at 10. Fine linen. A braided wig over her shaved head. Cosmetics and jewelry. She was taken into a dark sanctuary where the goddess loomed in stone. The high priest spoke in archaic words and declared her chosen. She repeated the vows she was taught. She did not grasp that those words made her temple property for life. Divine marriage was not just theater. It carried legal consequences. A bride of the god could not marry a man. She could not form a recognized family, own property, or leave. The temple owned her. And that marriage meant more in practice, which becomes clear in what followed. If this is opening your eyes to how ritual can mask exploitation, share this video, hit like, and tell me what you think about institutions that claim divine sanction for their power. Daily life enforced submission. Before dawn, the women rose in communal quarters under older overseers. Privacy was not allowed. They washed with natron, put on plain linen, and went to work. Weaving. Grinding grain. Brewing. Tending gardens. Preparing offerings. The temple profited. The women were told they served heaven. A few had direct ritual roles. Singers practiced hymns and played sistrums and drums for ceremonies. Silence was the rule except when permission to speak was given. The silence blocked friendships that could fuel resistance, kept the atmosphere devout, and kept everyone alone with fear. Nefertari's only friend, Takayat, whispered to her now and then in the weaving hall. An overseer caught her and struck her. After 3 days out of sight, Takayat returned changed and quiet. 2 months later, she disappeared. The overseer announced she had been found impure and returned to the gods. Everyone understood the warning. Surveillance was constant. Senior women and priests watched everything. Movement was restricted. Outsiders were barred. Family contact, if allowed at all, was supervised and rare. Monthly purity inspections meant more invasive examinations. Resistance meant more punishment. Escape was nearly impossible. Most had been taken too young to remember a life outside. They had no money, no property, no networks, and skills tied to temple labor. Even if a girl slipped past a gate, she would not know where to go. Indoctrination ran in parallel with labor. From day one, the girls were told they were chosen, that their obedience was sacred, that the priests spoke for the gods, that disobedience brought disaster now and in the afterlife. They were told their bodies were living temples. If your body belongs to a god, then the god's agents can enter that temple. If you are a divine bride, then those agents can claim marriage rights. The logic was airtight by design. They were told the outside world was dark and corrupt, that only within the temple could purity be found. Hymns and prayers repeated until the words felt true. Not everyone fully believed. At 16, Mutmua hummed a Nubian song in the dark, a memory of home. An older woman reported her. The high priest struck her. "You have no mother," he said. "No language but ours. No song but our hymns. No memory but what we give." A week of near starvation in a locked storeroom broke something in her. She never sang in Nubian again, though the words still visited her thoughts and made her weep silently. Now the part many never hear. Some women, especially God's wives, and those in fertility cults like Hathor or Mut, took part in rituals described in lyrical, symbolic terms. The god enters his sanctuary. The goddess receives. Divine seed brings prosperity. The language can be read spiritually. But inside closed sanctuaries, high priests embodied the deity, dressed as the god, spoke as the god, and claimed the god's rights. Women were purified, dressed, and told they would receive the god's blessing. They were told refusal would anger heaven and endanger Egypt. Inside that setting, priests exercised what they called divine marriage rights. These were not relationships. They were coerced acts by men who controlled the women's food, housing, movement, and future. The women had no power to refuse and no one to appeal to. Nefertari was selected for her first sacred union at 14. She was bathed and dressed and led among chanting priests and incense smoke. When she realized what was about to happen, she tried to step back. Others held her. The high priest told her refusal was blasphemy. What happened next was recorded as a successful ritual. Nefertari knew it was a violation wrapped in religion. She had no words and no recourse. And it would likely happen again. Many women were selected multiple times, depending on the festival calendar. Some conceived. Their children were called blessed and raised within temple households. Daughters often entered service. Sons could be trained as priests. The system reproduced itself. At 16, after 3 more rituals, Nefertari discovered she was pregnant. She did not know which priest was the father. She was moved to quarters for expectant women. There, for the first time, she could speak openly with others about fear. An older woman explained the pattern. After weaning, the child would be taken. Girls to service. Boys to priestly care. The mother might see the child in passing but could not claim her. The child belonged to the temple. Nefertari survived a dangerous birth and named her baby Nefura in her heart. The official record gave another name. 3 years later, the child was taken for training. Nefertari returned to work. She would catch glimpses in corridors, forbidden to acknowledge their bond. The girl was taught to call every woman mother and no one mother. The cycle rolled on. Punishments for resistance were crafted to terrify the many, not just the one. Purification by correction meant beatings administered by senior women, enforced fasting, or solitary confinement in dark rooms. The worst penalty was called dedication to the desert or return to chaos. A woman judged dangerously defiant was led beyond the fields into the desert and abandoned. No water. No food. No shelter. Guards stopped her from walking back. Death came by heat and thirst. Her body was left unburied. Her name forbidden. A woman named Henmahit, in her mid-20s, finally spoke aloud in the dining hall. This is not holy. These men are not gods. We are prisoners. She was seized without a hearing. The temple forced the women to watch as she was taken into the sand and left. The next day they were marched past her body. The message was unmistakable. It also planted a second message in some hearts. The priests were not divine. The system was not sacred. Resistance, if it existed at all, had to be invisible. So it spread in tiny ways. A look shared when a priest spoke. A weaving pattern with hidden words. A hymn sung with a double meaning. And sometimes, a line scratched into stone where no overseer would think to check. Most temple women died within the precincts after lifetimes of service. They were buried as staff, not as daughters or mothers, often in unmarked places with minimal rites. When Nefertari died at 52, she was wrapped and set in a pit with 3 others. No coffin. No marker. No open mourning for her daughter. Within days, the living were told not to speak her name. Erasure was policy. Individuals were not meant to be remembered. The value was in the labor, not the person. But a few fought that final forgetting. In hidden corners, women carved quick messages. I was born free. They took that. Remember, we were people. My name was Mutmua before they changed it. I bore 4 children. All were taken. I loved them. If you find this, know we suffered. We did not choose this. We were prisoners. Tell our story. 2 days before she died of fever at 49, Mutmua used a stolen bronze tool to scratch a last testimony in a storage room. I came from beyond the first cataract. My mother was a Monator. She sang in Nubian. I remember her voice, though I have not heard it in 41 years. This life was not my choice. These gods were not my gods. If you find this, know that I existed. I remembered. I never stopped being Mutmua of Nubia, even when they called me by other names. No priest read that line. No daughter learned it. The words sat in the dark long after the temple fell silent. A whisper from stone saying, I lived. Remember me. This is the part tours do not mention. The columns still stand. The painted walls still glow. Guides talk about kings and gods and piety. Almost no one speaks about the girls taken as children, the rituals that broke them, the years of exploitation, and the way their names were erased in death. Now you know. Now when you look at those walls you can also see the human suffering baked into the stone. You can remember the women who tried to resist in the only ways they could, who left traces on purpose so someone, someday, might understand. They were Nefertari, sold at 9 to pay a debt. They were Mutmua, seized at 8 from Nubia. They were Takayat, Henmahit, Nefura, and thousands whose names are missing because records were destroyed or never kept. They were people. They suffered. They lived. They deserve remembrance, not as anonymous cogs in a holy machine, but as human beings who endured and still carved out small acts of refusal. How should we meet ancient monuments that were also sites of abuse? Should claims of sacred authority ever go unchallenged? What patterns from this story echo in the modern world? Tell me in the comments. If you believe these histories matter more than comforting myths, subscribe and share. Here, we follow the evidence, give voice to people official records tried to erase, and refuse to forget the victims. Not everything beautiful is good. Not everything called sacred was holy. The temples still stand. The stones still remember. And now, so do you. See you in the next video.